guys, welcome back to another episode of the Whiskey Diaries. My name is Martin Lang and we're here at Death and Taxes, and today we're going to be talking about Islay whiskies. We're going to go through a little bit of an introductory process in which we're going to go through all the classic whiskies that we have in Islay, going through each distillery and going like a few key points of each one individually. We have already done Bruichladdich and Lagavulin, and eventually we'll cover all of them individually. But this is just an introductory course, so you guys know all the whiskies that there is there, or most of them, and that they're currently being working. We're not going to be talking about, we're going to casually mention Port Ellen, that is a closed distillery, but they still do bottlings, and then Port Laphroaig as well. There is a new distillery in 2014, but we're not going to go into many details with at the moment. We're just going to be talking about the classic ones, just to get your head around it, and so you can just know all the basic ones. We're going to start with Lagavulin. Lagavulin started in 1816. It's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. They had a big fight in the early 1900s between Lagavulin and Laphroaig to see who was the smokiest and who can produce each whiskey. It's basically a long story. We're not going to go into that. But they produce the classic 16-year-old is a core range, is a flagship. They do an 8-year-old, they do a 12-year-old, and then they do a 25-year-old. All of them are absolutely delicious. The 12-year-old tend to be a yearly release. They do it every year. They do a different one, and it's cask strength, super strong. The 8-year-old got released maybe 3 or 4 years back. And it's just something just to showcase how young and beautiful Lagavulin can be. The 16-year-old Diageo, well, it's owned by Diageo, so Lagavulin 16. They don't officially say what casks they have been aged on, but knowing Lagavulin, and I've tried it so many times, I can tell that there's some sherry influence. Diageo will not confirm or deny what sort of cask, but there's a lot of talk on the internet saying that it might have been a second maturation in Oloroso or PX casks, since the Distiller's Edition base on this one gets aged in sherry casks. It's a double maturation, but nobody can confirm it. I would say for the color and for the taste, there is sense. I believe there might be a certain sherry, but nobody says. Now that's Lagavulin, and the next one we're going to be talking about is Ardbeg. Ardbeg is a whiskey that produces 3 of the main ones. The core range is, well, the 10-year-old that I have in my head. Then they do the Corrie Brecken and they do the Ugadale, all Gaelic names. They do obviously a 21-year-old, a 30-year-old, and other different age statements, but the core range is basically these ones. They do also a yearly release. Each year they do a different theme. Like for instance, in the 2014 Brazil World Cup, they do the Ori Verdes, and then they do the Perpetuum, they do Galileo, all sorts of different releases. They're highly collectible. And then they do something that is called a committee release. That is, if you belong to the committee that you can join online, they send you an email, and it's basically a cask strength version of what that yearly release is. Delicious and highly collectible. Ardbeg is close to Lagavulin and Laphroaig. They're all like on the same side of the coast, like Lagavulin and Laphroaig, and then most of the distilleries in Islay, they're close to the ocean, though, so it creates a really highly iodine, like medicinal type of whiskey. This one gets the 10-year-old get mostly aged, well, 100% aged in American oak, ex-bourbon casks, and is actually delicious, quite strong. Most of them is 46% alcohol or higher. The next one that we are going to be doing is Bowmore. Bowmore 12, like Buna Heaven, they produce a very lightly peated whiskey. We have talked about this distillery in particular, but the main thing that you want to know about Bowmore is mostly an introductory whiskey to what Islay can provide. So it's lightly smoky, so you don't have that punch that you get from Ardbeg or Laphroaig, but you still get a lot of smoke. The core range for Bowmore in particular is all over the shop. They produce duty-free versions, the 12, but the main ones are the 12-year-old, the Legend. They do 15, 18, they do a 21, but mainly, and then they do a lot of duty-free as well. So it's
Also quite soft in the ABV, 40% alcohol, and it's mainly, most of them are American oak. One thing that is interesting about Bowmore though is that the independent bottlings of this whiskey are actually super delicious. The core range of Bowmore are really good introductory whiskies, but if you really want to get into connoisseur, like tasting the spirit itself, I will recommend just to go to Gordon MacPhail's or any independent bottlers out there, and Bowmore is actually delicious as well. Then the other one that we're going to talk about is Laphroaig. Laphroaig is as well one of the basically core ranges of what Islay gives. Is basically, in Laphroaig and Islay are like basic. Like you cannot have an Islay whiskey without having tasted Laphroaig first. It's 1 year earlier than Lagavulin. They fight about who started distilling first. Apparently Lagavulin started first because they were doing illegally distilling, but it doesn't matter, we won't go into all that story, all that history. They have the King, the Royal crest on the bottle, and they produce a very iodine-like whiskey that is really medicinal. And if you go online and you look on YouTube, Laphroaig marketing campaigns, they actually really pride on that particular taste and that really, really weird hospital iodine taste. Most of the whiskies are aged in American oak. The core range is the 10-year-old. Then they do a triple wood. Then they do the 4 oak, and then they have another few ones. They really like to experiment with different types of oak. The 10-year-old is delicious, 40% ABV. You can't go wrong. Now, the next one that we're going to do is Bruichladdich. Bruichladdich is one of the only whiskies in Scotland, and I would say the world, that is completely farm to bottle. They can produce their own barley. They have a massive farm, so they grow their own barley. They do different editions as well, and the core range, the Bruichladdich, which is the Laddich Classic, it comes in a blue bottle, is unpitted. So it's one of the only whiskies that the core range is not pitted from Islay. Obviously Caol does it, but we'll go into Kilcolly in a second. So yeah, Bruichladdich they do everything manually as well. I've been to the distillery myself, and it's actually all manually, including like measuring the vat. They put chalk. The mill that mashes the grain is actually so old that they have to hire an engineer to redo the actual mill, because when it broke, they didn't have anybody who knew how the mill worked. So it's a great whiskey. Most of them are over 46% ABV. This one in particular, the one I'm holding, is a Islay Barley 2010. This is almost like a vintage bottle, similar to Barley in the way that each year they release a different bottling, and they use different barley from the island only. The Bruichladdich Classic and some of the other Bruichladdich, they actually source the barley from mainland Scotland. This one, yeah, again, 100% aged in American oak and 100% done on the island, which is really hard because Islay, the barley in Islay actually is super hard to grow. Doesn't have as much yield, and it's really temperamental, so they're just trying to prove that they can do it, and also that it actually tastes different, and it does. It's actually delicious. The next one that we're going to be talking about is Buna Heaven. Buna Heaven is on the other side of the island, close to Caol. It's basically in front of Jura, so just on top of the island, if you want to see. This one is even lighter than Bowmore. Bowmore is they basically is almost unpitted. Like this, you still get some smoke on it, but I wouldn't say even close to Bowmore. They say, their marketing say that they get the pittiness from the actual water that goes through the peat bogs, but I would say that there's certainly some smoke. So when they dry the barley, they definitely get some smoke using from the peat. Because, but yeah, they do a 12-year-old that is the core range, and then they have all different ones for duty free and travel retail as well. They do a 25 and they do an 18 as well. Delicious whiskey as well. I think the 18 as well gets aged in Oloroso casks. Really, really good for beginners and for connoisseurs alike, because it's actually a delicious whiskey. And the travel retail as well. They do the 1 litre bottles as well, and it actually you should definitely get it when you can travel again. Then we got Caol. Well, in Australia we say Caol. Most people say Caol. Actually pronounced Cool Isla. Cool Isla means it's basically the Gaelic name of the little trench of water that goes between Jura and Isla. This one in particular, we're not going to go. The core range is the 12 and the Moch. Cool Isla produces 90% of their whiskey actually goes to Johnny Walker. It's part of the Diageo core range, but it's a massive distillery. Out of all the distilleries in Isla, I will say that this has the least amount of character. If you put it, it's very industrial. They produce 6.5 million litres a year of whiskey, and 95% of that goes all to Johnny Walker. So I'm assuming it goes mostly to Johnny Walker Black as well, and just because of the smokiness that Johnny Walker Black has. They also produce a lot of unpeated whiskey. So they do the 17-year-old unpeated and a 12-year-old unpeated as well. I prefer the 12-year-old peated and the Moch. All of them are delicious. The Cool Isla Moch actually means Moch means dawn, and the reason is because they're on the side of the coast that the distillery is the first one to see the sunrise, because it's on the east coast. Delicious distillery, even though it's quite industrial and quite big. They produce a really good whiskey, and it's again one of my favorites as well. I'm not sure we're gonna be able to fit that one. I'm just gonna so you can see that bottle. And then the final, we're gonna talk about Kilchoman. And the reason why we're gonna do this is final is the newest distillery. They started in the early 2000s. It's the newest distillery in almost 200 years to open in Isla. And they are basically the way farm. It's tiny distillery. Well, when I was there in 2014, they only had 2 stills. I'm not sure if they actually expanded, but it's super tiny. And like Bruichladdich as well, they do everything. They can do everything from growing their own barley to bottling to labeling to everything on the distillery itself. Being a farm beforehand, they actually can grow their barley. So they do similar to Bruichladdich. They do 100% Isla barley. The core range is the Machir Bay and then the Longmore. We have talked about Kilchoman before, so you can more than welcome just to watch one of the episodes just to go into more details. But this again, it's a delicious whiskey, and this is one of the only distilleries in Scotland, in Isla, that is inland. It's not. Well, you can still see the ocean from the distillery, but it's a lot further inland away than the rest of the bottling. I've been to the distillery, and you can literally miss the entrance. It's not like a big sign or anything like that. It's just really unique, and it's just like an open shed, and they just produce no-nonsense whiskey. It's actually really delicious whiskey. Most of them don't go even over 4 or 5 years old, and they're still absolutely amazing. And goes to show that the age of the whiskey doesn't necessarily mean that the whiskey is going to be better or worse. All of them are bottled at more than 46% ABV, and they're actually a great distillery. The one that we're going to try today is the Caol Moch, just because it's one of my favorite expressions from Caol. And they produce, there is a non-age statement, and it's basically a really good representation of what Caol can do and how clear the whiskey is. They're all ex-fill bourbon casks, but if you can see, I'm just going to put the glass here. It's like almost like clear spirit, and that's Caol in general, or Cool Isla in general. They just produce a really light whiskey. Very floral, very peppery, but as well, like they just respect the new make. Basically, it's like just drink it straight out of the still. It's very little color,
but you can definitely smell the iodine and the salt. Nice peppery aromas. It's absolutely delicious as well. Actually, you can taste the sweetness of the new make as well. It's quite viscous as well, but it has a really nice dry finish. Anyway, guys, hopefully this covers most of the core range of Islay, and we'll see you next time. Slàinte mhath.